Hello, I'm Sydney.
I'm Christin.
I'm Kaitlyn. We're going to start off by talking about the Sue and Sue readings, Chapter 24, Counseling Older Adults.
One thing that kind of stood out to me was it said that counselors and even society they're not really prepared to handle older folks and that population. So that kind of stood out to me, and also making sure the counseling environment is appropriate for clients, making sure good lighting and not really noisy, or just making sure they have access and can get into the counseling room. So that was something that stood out to me.
I guess going off of that, I was kind of I thought it was common sense when they were oh, we'll make sure that they have their hearing aids or glasses, but at the same time I was oh, I guess I've never actually thought about that before, even though it seems like it's common sense, also, I just never thought about it.
Let's see. Moving on, I wrote down a quote from chapter 24 that said, "Older women especially are likely to be viewed negatively by society as a whole, and many internalized ageist norms involving qualities such as beauty." And so that just made me think about how much pressure society places on, women of all ages, but especially even as they get older and they experience the effects of ageism and discrimination based on age. These were just kind of topics that I hadn't really thought about a lot before reading this chapter.
That even made me think about being a burden to society, having that thought, or just even negative stereotypes that they're old people are depressed or they complain about everything. Society has already visions or stereotypes of what they think old people are like. And it was interesting to read about how a majority of older adults actually have emotional stability. And but it's interesting because in just even through media or whatever, we don't see that. So that was interesting.
Yeah, talking about the sexuality in later years, I guess, I never really thought about it being a problem that would be brought up in counseling for older individuals of having a sex life, just because it doesn't seem to me like they would, and that's my own bias I have towards that, but I know that it's a thing. I just don't really think about it, and I don't enjoy thinking about it. But I thought it was interesting when they talked about the study about sexual frequency among married couples, and that it decreases over time but begins to increase in those married for over 50 years, and I thought that was kind of interesting, and I wonder why it begins to pick back up after a certain amount of years. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Can't say I really thought about it either, or that I cared to, but I think maybe, didn't it say, the chapter say something about how their life satisfaction increases with age? Or I know I've read things that say that happiness in life generally increases among older populations. So maybe that has something to do with it?
Yeah, I think with married couples, because where was it where they were talking about depression with older people, and that it's the highest for males who have never married. Yeah, it's 20.6% of them have depression for males who have never been married, and then divorced is 19.2%. So I thought that was interesting, because women who were divorced, theirs is 23.1%, but it goes down when they've been widowed to 15.4%. So I thought that was interesting that they're less depressed when they're widowed, but more depressed when they've had a divorce. And why that would be. I don't know. I thought that was interesting because I assumed it would be opposite.
Right. Right.
I thought the substance abuse was also interesting,
Right.
just because I had never actually thought about it with older people again. But 11% of them abuse alcohol or drugs, and then 20% of seniors who take pain meds, 18% will become addicted.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was a really interesting statistic. I mean, I know that pain meds are extremely addictive. I just don't really think about old people being addicted to pain medicine.
Right, and I even thought it was interesting about why even they would use alcohol, and it was interesting because it mentioned feeling shame, for being a burden on society, having family conflicts, or just the fact that they're having typically more health problems or financial concerns. So that was interesting to connect that.
I feel like that's also something as counselors we need to be aware of, as far as if someone comes in and they're coming in because of substance abuse or something like that. We need to not let our biases about older adults not get in the way of being able to help them.
Yeah. I think when I think about old people, I just think of them as being small and little and old and not doing any of these things, being addicted to drugs or being an alcoholic, unless you're looking at a very stereotypical old man sitting at a bar. I just think of my grandparents sitting at home. I don't know. So I think you do have to consider that if you're going to counsel older individuals.
I also think kind of what you were talking about with counselors being aware. I also think that it's really helpful for counselors to make sure to have different resources for social support. So the reading mentioned even using religion and going to church and finding ways to get them connected with their family, different avenues to help make them feel connected.
Let's see. I thought it was interesting that 1 in 7 individuals who are over the age of 71 have dementia, just because I think that number is really high. But it makes sense, I guess. I don't think personally have met that many older individuals who have it for the percentage to be that high.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not sure what is causing that exactly. But I thought it was important the chapter talked about how self-identity and autonomy are super important to older adults, because generally, at least in the United States, your sense of independence kind of decreases as you get older, I feel just because of physical ability and if you're intellectually struggling. But the chapter talked about how it's even important to those with dementia, which I kind of related to because my grandpa had Alzheimer's, and it was, he kept as much autonomy as he could, but at the same time, they sometimes require a lot of help. Interesting.
Yeah, and I guess that reporting cognitive decline and that they need to undergo assessments for that. I've never actually thought about older people having to do assessments on them for those types of things like dementia. I usually just think of it as in school settings, using it with school psychologists. So I don't know, just something to think about.
Well, I was just kind of what you were saying, Sydney, even not being able to drive.
Yeah, that was
that
I thought
freedom,
about that too.
I can't even go to the store without, because I'm not able to, or for example, my great grandfather, he had Lewy body dementia, and even so, even his eyesight, there came a point where there came a point where he, like, couldn't drive, and he would just be like, I just want to go to the store and just get some pickles.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. It just made me, like, kind of sad reading that in the chapter many adults are viewed as, like, a burden to society. Just because I don't know if it's because I was always super close with my grandparents growing up, but I've always, like, really valued older adults and, like, had that respect for them.
Yeah.
So it's kind of sad.
Yeah, and especially when reading about how, like, most of them feel, like, depressed and, like, socially isolated from everyone. So, yeah, I totally get what you're saying. It's really sad.
I agree when they said that we're not prepared to handle our current aged population, especially once, like, I think it was talking about the baby boomers, like, once they're getting to that age and, like, everything, like, there's, like, absolutely no way we have enough people who are willing to go into that type of field to take care of them. And, I mean, I know people now are, like, mistreated in nursing homes and everything like that. They don't get the things that they need or help with things that they need help with. So, I don't know. Like, we need more people in those fields, but we also need people who actually care about the elderly in those positions. So, I don't know. And the population of them is, like, drastically increasing because people are starting to live longer or have been living longer. So,
I guess I never really thought about, like, how, like, I've always been taught, like, or, like, been aware about how, like, you know, child abuse, be aware of that, but, like, I never really considered, like, elder abuse and how, like, especially, like, financially, like, if they're not cognitively, like, there and they have, like, maybe other family members helping them out, and, like, if they take advantage, like, that's, like, I never really, like, thought about that either. And even the reading even said it was a significant public, like, health concern. So that kind of stood out to me.
Let's see. This chapter also just kind of made me think about how different cultures view their elders, and how I think a lot of collectivists in, like, Eastern cultures, they really value elders and kind of view them as, like, a source of wisdom and knowledge. And I guess we just need to be cognizant of that when we're counseling, like, how younger people view the elder people. Elders? I don't know if that came out weird.
No, that makes sense.
To go back to the sexuality part, the part where it was talking about things that could be stopping them from being sexually active was for males erectile dysfunction, and then for females, like, not being able to properly be lubricated, or, like, those types of hormones. And I thought it was interesting that as a society we spend so much, like, time and energy and money trying to develop things like pills and stuff for men to fix that problem, but there's not really a lot of things to help women sexually with those problems once they get older. So I feel like that's just another layer of, like, how males are, what's the word I'm looking for? How, like, our society
Focus more on
values males more so than females.
Right. There was one part that I also liked was, or, like, it was interesting, was, like, when you're counseling an elder client, is to, like, make sure to, like, talk to them and not, like, about them, if that makes sense. Like, they're not in the room.
Oh, it talked about elder speak?
Yeah,
That.
exactly. That was just something that stood out, because, like, I could see that happening, like, especially if the daughter or son comes in and like talking for them. So it's mindful of the therapist to keep that in mind and, like, make sure to be respectful to them as well.
Yeah, my grandma hates when my aunt likes to go to her doctor's appointments with her because she just doesn't want someone interfering with the appointment.
It even makes me think about, like, autonomy, like, and
Yeah.
kind of taking that away.
Yeah. I mean, when my grandma had cancer, my aunts and, like, my mom and everything would go to the appointments with her just because she would lie, like, to them a lot about, like, the things that she was doing, if she was taking her medicines properly, if she was eating the way that they were telling her to. And so there was that, like, point where they were like, no, like, she's not doing that, blah, blah, blah. And then the doctors, like, she would get mad at them because she'd be like, that's not your position to, like, tell them. But they're like, well, you're not telling the truth, and they're not going to properly be able to help you if you don't.
Right.
But it was, like, set in her mind that she, like, wanted them to believe that she was doing everything that she could. So I feel like there's, like, to a certain extent, like, I don't know.
Right.
I agree.
Should we move on?
Yeah. We can move on.
So now we are moving on to Rothenberg, masculinity as homophobia. I'll just read a quote to start us off that I have. Masculinity must be proved, and no sooner is it proved than it is again questioned and must be proved again. Constant, relentless, unachievable, and ultimately the quest for proof becomes so meaningless that it takes on the characteristics, as Weber said, of a sport. I thought that quote, like, perfectly explained what she was saying throughout this whole chapter, just because I do believe that men are constantly trying to prove themselves to each other in numerous ways about who's, like, the strongest, like, biggest, who has the most power, who has the most income. I mean, I don't know. I think about how we were in, like, second grade, always trying to, like, one-up, like, our friends and, like, blatant lies, and, like, everyone knew you were lying, but, like, you didn't care because you had to be number one. I feel like men are constantly just stuck in...
Yeah, I know that. I agree. Like, it was interesting when they're, like, the quote that I wrote down was, like, how men would, like, boast to each other, like, about their accomplishments, and they even mentioned, like their sexual conquests, and, like, even the size of a fish they caught, like, everything. Like, it's just so much competition and wanting, like, reinforcement that they are, like, they need other men to tell them that they are manly.
Yeah, I was going to say that quote. It just makes me think of the constant quest for, like, power and dominance, and that kind of leads, I think, a lot of guys to act, like, through hypermasculinity and, like, really over-exaggerating, you know, trying to be macho or cool or strong, whatever it is, just to avoid being called, like, a sissy or all the insults that men call each other that mean weak. There's so many.
Right. Another part that kind of stood out was when they said that women become, like, a currency that men use to improve their ranking of their masculinity. And that was just, reading that was just, like, really, it's like you become, like, women become, like, money, like a source of, like an object, just to prove their manhood to another guy, like another guy proving, like, oh, you did it, good job,
Yeah.
you have your manhood.
They were talking about how other men always, like, are watching each other, they're ranking each other, and they're the ones who grant the acceptance into their realm of manhood. And I feel like that's true, but mostly for, like, I feel like it's, like, dads or something like that in that age range that are, like, I don't know, like, their sons or, like, younger males look up to, and they think that's, like, the man's man, and they want to become that, but then they also, like, on top of that, they have the pressure from, like, their, like, grandfather or their dad to also become like that. I don't know. I feel like a lot of it's very, like, phony, because I don't think, like, every guy actually wants to be that way, but they feel like they need to in society, and they need to be accepted by their family. So, yeah. Generational.
Right. That made me kind of think about the Tough Guys video, and what was your impressions about the video? What stood out to you?
I personally didn't like the end when they were talking about how women have to show that they're looking more, like, for men that aren't bad boys, or that they value men who reject that type of, like, tough guys, like, stereotype. I think that's putting, like, too much, like, of the weight, like, on females, when it should be the men who are more so, like, getting therapy or, like, looking at themselves to see what they should be able to fix, and that women are the ones who validate men to act that way. I don't know, I feel like that's just, like, casting blame, and I feel like there's another layer to it when you think of more, like, hormones in men that give them, like, testosterone, and then that, like, makes them act out in more aggressive ways and, like, want to, like, one-up the other, like, man. I don't think it's necessarily just society. I think there's a hormonal level to it, and I think for women, like, validating the way that men act, I think it's more so, like, innate for us to want to look for, like, the stronger man who's going to be able to protect us if we ever get, like, pregnant or anything like that. I don't think it's necessarily just society. I think it's also the way, like, I don't know. I think it's more
like another layer.
Yeah. I think it's more, like, driven by like that part of us that just, like, I don't know.
Yeah, I think like you bring up a good point, because, like, there probably are, like, layers going on there. Like, I feel like maybe they didn't touch on more of, like, I don't want to say biological, but I guess a little bit.
To a certain extent.
Yeah,
it is
but, like,
biological.
but this video, I think, focused more on, like, society. Like, one of the things that they mentioned was that where, like, men, like, and boys, like, learned being what a real man is, like, mostly portrayed in, like, media and, like, movies, and that kind of, I felt like they kept, like, highlighting, like, oh yeah, it's media, like, it's socially, so it's good that you bring up another layer of, like, a potential, like, biological aspect.
I think it's just he and Jackson Katz kind of made it seem like it's just a cycle of, like, you know, boys see their parents and how the men are supposed to act. They see their dad, and then they see it on TV. And today there's so many more technological resources than they had in the past. So I feel like it's just everywhere for boys growing up today. You know, they all have cell phones, they all have the internet, they all have TV, Twitter, whatever it is. So I think that these, let's see, what did I write? It said, through culture and media, boys' violence is reinforced, which I thought was kind of true and very relevant with, like I said, how easily accessible and how present all of these images are today to young boys especially.
I thought that the percentages of how, like, compared to, like, males and, like, women, like, who does the most, like, who has the most domestic violence or dating violence, or, like, the number of assaults, and how it was in basically the 90s for, like, men.
I wrote that down, too.
And I thought that was, like, I mean, like, I already knew that or assumed that, but I didn't know the actual percentages, so it was interesting to actually see how high they were for them. But then they were talking about how most of victims of male homicide are men, and that it's 76% men who are, like, murdered compared to 24% of women. And to me, I don't know if that just kind of, I didn't really, like, they're right that, like, but the way they phrased it in the video made it seem like you might think that, like, all of this is getting taken out on women, but it's actually men who are mostly being affected by the way that they're acting and everything like that. And I feel like it just kind of, like, downplayed how they treat women and everything like that. And then I feel like to say that it's, I don't know, that it's more so affecting men, I'm like, I don't think that's true, because they're all, for the most part, like, acting somewhat like that, and I think it's taken out mostly on women. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like I'm not phrasing it right, but, like,
I feel like maybe he was trying to appeal to, like, a male audience and say, like, hey, this affects you just like it also does affect women. That's just my only thought.
Yeah, but they're like, it's affecting you all more than it's affecting women. Mm-hmm. But, like, I see that they have, like, the percents here, but to a certain extent, I also, like, I mean, like, I agree that it's affecting them, but to say that it's, like, only 24%, like, homicide, I don't necessarily think that's accurate.
Right.
I don't think a lot of things go, like, reported, or, like, even if it's reported, it's not, like, once it actually gets taken to court or something, they're not always found guilty, so I feel like this percentage isn't exactly accurate. Mm-hmm. I don't know. And I feel like it was just kind of, like, invalidating how much they actually do impact and affect, like, women.
Yeah. I think it's also interesting to look at, like, it's great to see from, like, that perspective, but I also thought it was interesting to see, like how much they have to, at least from society standards, like, how they feel, like, a lot of pressure to, like, keep up with everyone, or, like, other guys, and, like, one part that I wrote was, like, that it damages, like, keeping up with those, like, other men and trying to get, like, I guess, acceptance, that it's, like, damaging to their psyches and their ability to be decent human beings. So, like, that kind of, like, that's, like, kind of sad to think that just to have someone else prove to you that you're a man. Like, I don't know.
To always be having to prove it. Yeah. I kind of thought about that, too, and, like, how, I mean, that this is why most males have so much difficulty, you know, showing their emotions, or probably even really coming to therapy, like, just because of the pressures from society. And let's see, I wrote, boys are put into the box which defines manhood through dominance, violence, and control. And it's just, like, I'm sure a lot of young boys don't want to be that way, but they probably feel pressured.
Right.
I don't know.
I feel like when you look at, like, school settings, too, with, like, bullying and everything.
Yeah, exactly.
And then all the school shootings, how it's mostly, like, men who do it just because of toxic masculinity. I don't know. I think there should be, I mean, I don't even know what you can do to a certain extent to stop toxic masculinity, because it's so woven into our society and into the way we're, like, raised and taught to believe in. Like, I don't even think it's something that, like, we think about. Like, we're not, like, thinking that we're being that way towards men. It just happens, and we are. So, like, I don't know how to exactly go about stopping that.
Right.
I also wrote down, he talked about a little bit how different races of males are portrayed. Like, he wrote that Asians are usually portrayed as martial artists, blacks as criminals, Latinos as boxers, and violence is shown as, like, a cultural norm in these types of videos. And I just thought, you know, if these young kids are seeing people who look like them acting this way in the media, it definitely affects their psyche.
Yeah, especially because it's all tend to be kind of violent, too.
Yeah.
Or, like, not good. Or, I don't know if that makes sense. Like, a criminal, like, be bad.
Yeah.
That's what you want to be. that stood out to me too. And I think, and when he, like, the guy, when he finished talking, he even said, it's going to be a struggle if we want, like, real structural changes in society. And, like, just to help, like, men search for, like, a new, healthier version of who they could be. So that was kind of, like, I mean, that makes sense. Like, it's going to take work, and, like, it's not going to be an easy process. But doing that, I think, will, even like the video said, will help other generations of men and boys. If you can, like, start to create those changes.
Yeah, I think also in the one chapter, it talks about how Robert Brannon has, like, a list of 4 phrases. But one of them was be a sturdy oak, and then it was described as masculinity depends on remaining calm and reliable in a crisis. And I thought that was kind of funny because I don't think men are always, like, reliable in crises. I mean, like, when they have to be, like, strong or, like, macho, sure, but, like, when it comes to actually, like, crisis mode, people always more so, I feel like, go towards, like, women to be, like, I mean, like, I don't know, like, whenever you see, I don't know, kids are always taught to go up to a woman if there's, like, a crisis, like, at a school or something, like, right? Right. I don't know, like, what do we do? Where do we go? I personally think it's more so, like, crisis mode. Women are more, like, able to do things. I don't know. Yeah. That's just what I've seen.
Kind of going off of what you were saying, because this was in Rothenberg, right?
Chapter about masculinity.
Yeah. I, just hearing, like, the part where he's like, no sissy stuff, be a big wheel, like, be a sturdy oak. Can't read my handwriting. And give them hell. Like, all of those are, like, just so much, I feel like so much energy is, like, put into, like, being, like, daring, being aggressive. I think you bring up a good point, like, of looking into, like, the crisis mode. But it's just, I feel like there's just so much, like, proving, like, to be more aggressive, be more powerful, successful, like, do anything opposite of being feminine, though. Like, don't show your emotions.
Yeah, I think that is, what do you think the role of homophobia is in that?
With, like, those, like, talking about this?
Yeah, like, I'm trying to say, that men are so, and I guess society, like, is so ingrained to not be called a sissy or be called a fag or be called gay. And I just wonder, or I guess I'm kind of saying that I feel like homophobia has a huge role in those behaviors.
Yeah. I also feel like with homophobia, like, saying, like, no sissy stuff, it's also being, like, don't be feminine or don't be, like, a woman, or you hit, like, a girl or something like that. Like, those sayings are just, like, making sure that they know that women are below them. Like, as kids are growing up, when they're getting, like, fed those phrases, it just makes it even more, like, noticeable that don't act that way because
they're supposed to be superior.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Let's see if we can talk about Rothenberg and the social construct of gender. I think where it said, like, everyone does gender without thinking. I think that's very true just because, I mean, every day, at least, like, we get up and we dress, I guess, how you would typically think a female should dress. I mean, I don't know. I think something I think about a lot is, like, gender reveals. And I'm like, I think it should actually be called, like, sex reveal, which isn't always, like, accurate. Like, sometimes, like, chromosomes don't, like, match up to, like, X XX or XY. Like, there are different combinations, so, like, I don't know. I don't like the phrase gender reveal because you don't actually know how they're going to identify, like, later on in life. I think that's just, like, another thing, like, labeling us as one or the other and stopping it from being accepted when people do identify as something else because it's known as, like, not being normal.
Right.
I guess.
I thought, kind of bringing up the point where you were talking about, like, how we were, like, always doing gender. What surprised me was, like, I never really thought about it, but, like, in Rothenberg, it mentions how, like, how you walk, talk, gesture, just all those little things is influenced by gender. I never really thought, like, how I talk and walk, like, I don't know, I didn't really make that connection, but I could see it, and I thought that was, like, really interesting, and how, like, you need to, like society, like, wants to, like, maintain that, and, like, keep that, like, reinforcement of, well, if you're a girl, you're gonna act like this. If you're a guy, you're gonna act like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I liked how she talked about the little girl that she saw. I don't know if it was on the subway or on a bus, but she was, like, watching the mom, and she saw, I just wrote down the quote where she said, "I saw the little flower sneakers and lace trim socks, not a boy after all, gender done." And just kind of like you guys have been saying, how it's so unconscious that we just assume these things in our everyday lives, and it's like it's just how we operate. It's not even a conscious process.
I think what's also interesting is, like, they mentioned how, like, gender, like, roles change, and, like, the example that they had, like, where fathers were taking care of, like, the kids, and, like, both men and women are like, working the same jobs, and I think it's interesting and, like, important to acknowledge that it is, like, it's on a continuum. Like, there's no, like, set, like, responsibilities and roles for each person. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah, it's changing.
Yeah, and it evolves, and I think sometimes people don't think that it can change, but it can. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I mean, like, I feel like gender norms now are seen more like men staying at home.
Yeah, more like egalitarian.
Yeah, and more like women are working and things like that. So I still feel like people get really weirded out. I guess if you were to say you were a stay-at-home dad, they're like, oh, like, what? You don't have a job, you don't do anything. But it's like, why should they feel that way? Like, you know, like, for so long it was always, like, women who stayed home, but why can't a man stay home?
Right.
You know, it's just the labels that we put on certain things.
Right. I think that kind of goes into, like, our conversation, or, like, about, or at least I connected it to, like, the video of the trans liberation for everyone, and, like, kind of talking about, like, the category boxes as well. Was there any points in there that were interesting for you?
Yeah, so I was thinking, when it talks about how all gender play is good for all children, I feel like that's something we should be, like, encouraging more in kids when they're in, like, preschool or kindergarten or anything like that, just because, or, like, even at home, because so many kids are just given what you would typically give a male or, like, a female as toys. Like, for girls it's, like, Barbies, or for boys it's dinosaurs or trucks, but, like, that shouldn't define. I know, I had
everything.
Dinosaurs and one of Barbies,
Yeah.
So, like, I don't know, but a lot of people have a big problem with that, and I feel like if more kids were allowed to play with whatever they wanted to, they would grow up feeling and, like, having those thoughts that men need to be a certain way and women need to be a certain way, or that you need to like a certain thing and not like a certain thing, be classified as one or the other.
Right.
So,
Right.
like, I mean, I don't think like all gender play is going to like have a drastic change, but like it's a start.
Yeah.
I wrote down how she talked about how trans people are afraid to use public restrooms, and just like thinking about how challenging that must be.
And like how unsafe
Yeah.
they feel. Yeah. And like that's a simple thing.
I can't imagine that. Yeah,
Just like going to the bathroom, like a normal.
like we all go
Yeah.
everywhere we go, and
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's just crazy.
I think like we're seeing a lot more public places having like gender neutral bathrooms.
Mm-hmm.
And like I've noticed when I go to search like a restaurant or something on Google to like look up like the menu or something, like it has it listed like below that they have a
Really?
gender neutral
Never
bathroom
noticed.
now. And yeah, some of them like have it and some of them don't. So I feel like that's
Mm.
really like interesting that they're having that now there, because it's obviously like such a big factor for some people.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
they're putting it on their website like as one of the first things you see. So I thought that was kind of interesting, and I only just noticed it in like the past couple of weeks.
Like I just think about someone who like sees that and they probably feel like more safe.
Yeah,
and
way
they're like,
better.
okay, I can go here and I can be
Mhm.
myself.
Yeah,
And just go to the bathroom.
I know.
yeah.
Well, another part that like stood out to me was like when trans people would go seek like healthcare and like having to educate their own doctors and like how to treat them. That's kind of like, you know, you expect the doctor to be the expert and
Yeah.
or like, you know, like
Well,
that's just kind of the expectation, and now it's like, oh, I'm gonna have to inform you about everything.
Yeah, I mean, that also kind of just goes, like, even us as counselors, we need to be educated.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be educating us on their history, and, you know, we're supposed to be the expert.
Right. Yeah, it's like on us to like
Yeah,
figure, like to understand. And
I can't imagine going to the doctor and, like, having them ask me what to do for me. Like,
Yeah.
that's just...
I bet that's kind of really scary too.
Yeah.
And just being like, okay, you have a medical degree, and
Yeah.
like, I don't know, I could just see that being really scary.
I thought the one story that she told about the girl who committed suicide by jumping in front of the truck,
That was so
and that she left a note that she wanted her death to be added to how many trans people kill themselves every year.
Yeah.
And I thought that that was like just like really sad that somebody was taken to the point of like taking their lives to like kind of like even just stay at a point like that they're not recognized, and that it would probably go like undocumented as her like committing suicide because of that reason.
Mhm.
If somebody didn't have that like written down, they would have just maybe ignored that part of it to not put it towards the statistic that could help them get help.
Yeah.
So I thought that was like really interesting and sad.
It's like that. Like it's almost like you had to prove, like to take your life to prove and like get that like acknowledgement out there, and that's just it's really sad that like the measures
Yeah.
like that had to be good like done.
Yeah.
She also said at the beginning, she was going to talk about the resilience of trans people and how they make it a better world for them, so it will be a better world for me. I wasn't like, what did you guys think of that? Do you remember that?
Oh, like at the beginning.
Yeah, she said it at the beginning of the film.
What did it say?
Sorry.
Say it again.
She was going to talk about the resilience of trans people and how they make it a better world for them, so it will be a better world for me, like for you and me.
Well, I feel like, did she go into, I don't have that part written down, but she was saying, like, why aren't we making the world a safer place for them? Because, like, in the long run, like, it will, like, help us as well.
Yeah,
like, be freed from this, like, type of
Okay.
thought process or something like that's what
Yeah.
I was, like, gathering from it.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's- I wasn't sure entirely.
Like, she is saying that we need to do this because it will also help liberate our own selves.
Yeah.
And I thought that was an interesting way to phrase it, but I also feel like she was, like, phrasing it that way to get the attention of people and make them feel like, oh, this could benefit you. Like, kind of like a sales pitch to kind of, like, get people to, like, come this way.
Exactly.
And I feel like it's kind of sad that you have to do that to be like, this could also help you if you just
like,
do this
so
common
listen.
courtesy to
Right.
help this person. Like, that's, like, I mean, I'm not sure if that's where she was going with it, but that's how I kind of saw it, just, like, as a way to, like, lure people in to be, like, decent human beings. I don't know.
I found, or, like, I wrote a quote that she said at the, towards the end was, like, if we're making changes, it will cause, like, a ripple effect in, like, other communities, and, like, kind of like what you were saying, like, with, we become more loving and compassionate to others and, like, ourselves as well. So, kind of highlighting what you were saying. So she even went to the extent of explaining, like, to that little kid inside of us that got beat up about, like, which gender box, like, you can, like, have some, like, compassion for that little kid that's inside of you.
I was thinking, like, how she was, like, talking about how emotional women are labeled as hysterical and how women can't get fit enough or pretty enough and then can't, like, get emotional at all. How she, like, also talked about how those play into our society as well. I don't remember how she brought this up. But I just thought it was interesting because, I mean, women, like, if they do, like, one thing that's, like, crying or, like, any type of, like, emotion, like getting mad or angry or anything, it's like, oh, well, she is crazy or something. But if a man does it, it's like, oh, well, man, that's normal. That's how they're supposed to act. So, like, I mean, not the crying part, but
and even, like, I wrote some of the questions that she was, like, asking, like, who, like, told you that you were, like, a boy or girl, or like, who taught you, like, the unspoken, like, rules about performing gender, and what would happen if you stepped out of the tiny box. That was just, I thought that was, like, really interesting to think about, because in moments where, like, at least for my life, like, if I've ever, I guess, stepped out of the box where, like, I was more assertive with, like, group projects, like, I would get, like, if there was other guys in my group, I even talked about it in some of my journal articles, how, like, I would get labeled, like, bitch, like, and I'm like, well, no, I was being, like, I'm trying to give us direction to finish our project, but instead, think about it, if I was a guy, that wouldn't have been perceived like that.
At the school where I work, the students there, like, a lot of them, well, one in particularly, like, I'll always, like, have to redirect him to do his, like, schoolwork or to stop talking or to get back into his seat and stop interrupting others. And, like, he's on, like, a list of, like, 4 kids that I'm supposed to be doing that with in that classroom. And, like, he's called me, like, a bitch, like, several times and says that he doesn't like me, like, straight to my face. But I know, like, for certain, because I've seen him with an IA that's a male, and, like, he'll tell him the same exact things, and that's not the way. He would never say that to him. So I'm just, like, even, like, seeing it in, like, little kids, like, of that age, like, already, like, clearly having those, like, gender norms and, like, treating, like, people that way. I don't know. It's, like, it doesn't, like, make me, like, mad that he, like, said that towards me. It just, like, kind of is, like, a shitty feeling because it's, like, it's not getting better with those age groups. Like, we, like, think that, like, people are becoming more educated and that parenting styles are, like, I don't know, getting better because they're more informed or something like that. But it's not, like, kids in schools are still, like, going that way.
It just gets, like, more reinforced.
Yeah. We could talk. Are you guys ready to move on?
Yeah, probably.
So let's talk about D'Angelo, Chapter 10, White Fragility and the Rules of Engagement. I thought it was interesting with the guidelines that she was bringing up about how we have these guidelines that we follow if we're in group settings or in classrooms where they're don't judge people, don't make assumptions, or always assume good intentions. And then she went on to kind of debunk those things in a way. For example, for the don't judge one, she was this isn't even possible. So this guideline's pointless. We all have judgments, biases, all those things. And to always assume good intentions. So she was by emphasizing intentions over impact, this guideline privileges the intentions of the aggressor over the impact of their behavior on the target. And in doing so, the aggressor's intentions become the most important of and that this guideline tells victims that as long as there was no intention of cause of harm, they need to let go of the hurt and move on, which upholds white racial innocence and minimizes the impact of racism. And for all of these guidelines, she just went on about how it's actually more so driven by white fragility to have these guidelines, because it just re-emphasizes that I don't know my words anymore, but it just helps white people hold power over minorities.
Maintain.
Minority. I can't speak. Yeah, it just helps them hold power.
I think that just thinking about that kind of made me even think about the Coates reading, the page 81 through 95, and how the quote that I wrote down is talking about the children, and you are all we have, and you come to us endangered. I think we would like to kill you ourselves before seeing you killed by the streets that America made. And just seeing how the impact of how Black people have experienced all the generations of this, and how it's almost they don't want the younger generations to have to go through what they did, because in the end they know America will, it's either America or them that does that. So that was one part that stood out to me and kind of made me connected to that.
Yeah, I mean, I had that same quote written down. I think we all had that quote written down. Yeah, it stood out to me just because, I mean, to even write that, even if you don't actually mean that you would rather kill them yourself, even to the point of just saying that, I feel really shows how much they've gone through and how much they're even willing just to say because of racism. And that I don't know, when it says seeing rather than seeing you killed by the streets America made, I don't know, I was also thinking generational, and for so many generations we just had this loop on repeat about how we treat, or how many Black kids get murdered or shot by cops or something like that, and it's just a cycle that seems to never be ending.
Yeah, from the D'Angelo, what I wrote about her guidelines, I wrote down a quote, and it said, "In fact, it functions beautifully to make it nearly impossible to engage in the necessary dialogue and self-reflection that can lead to change. Outrage at the suggestion of racism is often followed by righteous indignation about the manner in which the feedback was given." So I just thought this quote was interesting to me because I've definitely seen it at play before with, if you try to point out to someone who's white that what they said could be perceived as offensive, or maybe they should be more mindful, maybe consider other people's feelings. Just kind of back to that white fragility, that the first reaction is so often defensiveness, and, it just stops there. And that means that they're completely blocking off their ability to even try to change or maybe consider someone else's perspective.
And also, going off of that, it made me think about, the necessary, we need the sun, moon, and stars all lined up.
Yeah.
Don't, have, the tone matters. We need to create trust first. We can't have any issues. Because that needs to be addressed first before you, criticize. My racistness. That was an example. Or, so I feel or being indirect, I feel just, everything has to be all, okay, I'm finally ready to, talk about it once I have all this established. And, seeing that and then seeing, what she said was, how it should be is, how, where, when the feedback is irrelevant, and then thank you for giving it to me. Super quick, straight to the point. Well, this was, with white fragility, it was, this long list of, okay,
yeah.
I need to have all these conditions before we start talking about, my racist.
I think that's on purpose. They have all those conditions so that they don't have to actually engage.
So we can move on now to White Women's Tears. That's chapter 11 of D'Angelo. I guess when I was reading this, I understood what they were saying, but also I feel like I've never actually seen this play out in real life. But also maybe that was just me never actually, noticing it. But I can understand if you were to be in this situation, how a person of color might feel to seeing a white person cry because of something that happened to a person of color because of a white person. And I can see how that would be, frustrating and annoying to witness. I guess I've just never actually thought about it, and I've never actually witnessed this, this particular thing happen.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna agree with you. I've also never, experienced it personally. But I just wrote down a quote about how D'Angelo talked about how all the attention in the room just immediately goes to the white woman that's crying. And while she's given attention, the people of color are yet again blamed and abandoned. So I just had never really considered it from that perspective before. But after reading this, it's I definitely can understand why that would be frustrating.
I also haven't really seen that actually being played out, but I mean, one part of the what she mentioned was our emotions drive behaviors that impact other people. That part, I could see that, and that made sense to me. But I've never seen it the example of when the white woman was crying and took away the whole conversation and shut it all down. I really thought it was nice that she had a metaphor when it was the first responders come to the scene and they go comfort the person that hit the pedestrian while the pedestrian's on the side just bleeding.
Yeah,
bleeding out. So that I feel that kind of explained the extent of how problematic this is. Yeah. I appreciate when they have metaphors because it's another way just to understand and digest what is what the message is trying to come across.
Yeah, I thought it was also interesting when they were saying when white men come to the rescue of white women in cross-racial settings, the patriarchy is reinforced as they play savior to the damsel in distress, and that by legitimating white women as the target of harm. Both white men and women accrue social capital. And I guess, like, it makes sense when you break it down like that. I just never really thought about it like that, because I never, like, I guess, had to. But yeah, just, like, I don't know, I guess.
That, like, made me connect to the Coates reading when, like, he was with his son in Baltimore, and how, like, the white woman kind of pushed his son, and, like, he, like, stood up, and then the woman was kind of, like, surprised, and then the white man, like, came up
to the rescue.
That, yeah, exactly. And then I feel like that's kind of portrayed even with D'Angelo, too. So I thought that was interesting. Like, making a connection between the two.
You didn't even think of that.
I thought it was interesting when she was listing, like, all the things that white men do, like controlling the conversation by speaking first, last, or most often. I feel like I see it all the time. Like, even when I'm just, like, hanging out with a group of guys, like, in, like, any type of setting, like, they always have, like, the first or last word, or they talk, like, so much more, like, even more than women. I think, on average, like, men, like, always are talking. Like, when you are in a setting and there's, like, an equal amount of, like, males to women, I mean, to me, it always seems like they have something to say, or they're always talking, or they talk over you.
Yes, being loud.
Yeah, and it's like you're not even there. Or, like, when you're talking, they can get just, like, distracted and, like,
So
drift
easily.
off, and then start their own, like, conversation. It's like, I was literally just talking to you.
Yeah.
But, alright. And then they, like, either get silent or withdrawn, hostile, or they distance themselves, or they, like, explain away racism and the experiences that colored people might have. And I feel like, in the video we watched on our Saturday class, class?
Color of Fear.
Yeah, I feel like, the white male,
David.
yeah, who was, like, always trying, I feel like that's, like, a perfect example of a male who's trying to, like, explain it away, and be like, well, like, maybe if you guys are just, like, thinking about it too much, like, I think you're equal to me, so you should just, like, believe that you're equal to me, and that would solve all your problems, like, things like that.
Yeah, I wrote, D'Angelo, she also said, stopping our racist patterns must be more important than working to convince others that we don't have them, which is, like, totally what David was spending his whole time doing, trying to convince people that he's not racist, he doesn't see color, whatever excuse.
Or, like, you are American just like me, when he said that. Yeah.
Yeah.
One part that I appreciated was, and I talked about it in my journals in the past, I think the past one that we just did was being aware of impact versus, like, intentions. So, like, the quote that I wrote down was, like, many, like, white people have not, like, learned how racism works and their role in it, like, their specific role in it, and, like, how tears, like, having tears, like, might be the shock and, like, in their own distress, and they don't recognize or the impact of it, and kind of like what we've highlighted before, like, for people of color, like, the tears demonstrate, like, the racial, like, and, like, privilege being, like, perpetuated, and I think that's just important for us to be mindful of our, like, impact, because, like, in previous D'Angelo readings, we've learned that, like, yeah, okay, your intention was whatever, but the impact, like, you did impact me, and, like, that even highlights, kind of with, like, our talk about the white fragility and, like, the conditions and how, like, oh, you misunderstood me. Like, that was your problem, you know?
Yeah, I feel like it's not...
Like, you need to be aware of, like...
It's not our place
Yeah.
to tell them how they understand, you know, how someone feels is how
Yeah,
they feel.
exactly.
How it impacted them is fact. It's not our experience.
Yeah, it even mentions, like, acknowledge that my intentions are always good, but it's like, and cancels out my behavior, which that's not, like, you can't just do that and, like, not expect, like, the consequences or, like, people to be hurt in the end.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one part that, like, was interesting, because although, like, it might be new for, like, a white person to experience it, but I think it's just important to keep in, like, your thoughts, like, okay, how, like, what am I doing that could impact someone else?
Yeah.
What time is it? No, we're good. Yeah. So I think we've covered everything. Yeah.
I think we hit them all.
Yep.
Thank you,
Perfect.
Tracy.
It's still going.